You are listening to the audio recording of the chapter After Bhopal, written by Mander. The Bhopal gas tragedy that happened in 1984 is considered as one of the worst industrial disasters in the world history. The leakage of the deadly gas claimed thousands of lives. Over 16,000 people were claimed dead. 3,787 people were claimed dead by the government declared officially, and about more than 5,58,125 people were injured. After Bhopal is a story written by Mander, who was born in the year 1955. This story is after the gas tragedy about Sunil, a boy who survived, an 11-year-old whose life changed completely because of this incident. Sunil was a survivor of the 1984 Union Carbide gas tragedy, which took the lives of his brothers, 3 of his sisters, and both his parents in one single night. So that very night, the 2nd of December 1984, Sunil's family were all curled together under one blanket when around midnight they suddenly woke up with this terrible feeling of suffocation. When they woke up, they could not breathe, and the neighbors were banging on the door shouting that the gas has leaked from the factory. Everyone was in a panic mode. And it was the night of 2nd December 1984. So that night, Sunil did not want to go to bed prior to the gas leakage. His bag and his uniform were ready for school the next day, but Sunil was still in a playful mood. It was Sunday, and he had played with his 7 brothers and sisters. His sister Pushpa, who was also married, was at home to celebrate Diwali, and he wanted to spend more time with his sister. If we look at the life of his father was a carpenter, respected for his skills in making furniture, and he earned over 100 rupees a day, which was quite sufficient for his family. They live in a small hut in a slum called JP Nagar. The government had awarded all slum dwellers tenurial rights for the land on which their homes stood only months earlier. So this JP Nagar is just adjacent to or near this, next to this Union Carbide factory, which was very actually dangerous, and people shouldn't be living there actually. But given the situation of our country, there is no surprise that people are actually living there. JP Nagar was a slum that had been settled haphazardly just adjacent to the Union Carbide Corporation. So this Union Carbide Corporation is an American manufacturer of chemicals and petrochemicals that partnered with Indian government controlled banks to establish Union Carbide India Limited pesticide plant in Bhopal. So the name of the factory is Union Carbide Corporation. It is owned by this American manufacturer of chemicals and petrochemicals, and is situated in Bhopal. So at that very night, what happened was, according to what has been laid out, it seems a large quantity of water had entered one of the storage tanks of the factory through these leaking valves or pipes. So the tank contains 60 tons of methyl isocyanate, and the water triggered a runaway chemical reaction, resulting in the discharge of 40 tons of lethal combination of methyl isocyanate on a sleeping city of a million unsuspecting people. So the first localities to be hit was JP Nagar, where Sunil and his family were sleeping. Sunil was 11 years old, and he held the hand of his younger sister Mamata as he ran desperately. So there was this shouting and screaming of people from all sides. Some fell down, some were crushed, some tore off their clothes, and as he looked around, some people were vomiting uncontrollably. The stench of urine and shit was overpowering. All around, people were collapsing, unconscious, or dead. And in the midst of all that, of all the chaos, he lost his sister in the crowd. Sunil was able to get inside the van. The van driver was bundling his family into the van. Sunil just tried, and he was able to get inside the van. Later, he was taken to the district hospital in Hoshangabad. When he was discharged from the hospital, Sunil's relatives took him back to JP Nagar. So it was like returning to a graveyard. People were just weeping, wailing, and he could see relief volunteers distributing food and milk everywhere. And slowly his relatives broke their silence on the immense tragedy that had befallen him. His mother had died holding her 8-month-old infant son Sanjay, who had miraculously survived. The relatives had identified her body in the Hamidia police station and had retrieved the baby. On the night of the gas leak, their father had locked the hut before they ran. So when he opened the door on his return the next morning, he found the dead body of one of his sons, Santosh, who had been accidentally left behind in the panic. Shortly after, the father died, maybe because of the gas, maybe of a broken heart. We really don't know. So after some time, his father also died. Probably, maybe, I believe it was because of the heart attack, because his wife had died, his sons, his sister, his daughters. It must have been really difficult, or it must have been so hard for him to even take in. Sunil suddenly found himself almost completely lost in the world. He was only 11 years old. Many a times he was helped mainly by the neighbors in JP Nagar. They fed the children and took turns to look after the baby. Every now and then he would hear these sounds of weeping from different corners at unexpected hours of day and night. Sunil decided not to go back to school, but instead devote himself entirely to his brother and sister. This was something, a very big step taken by Sunil, and it was all for the betterment of his brother and sister's life. So initially, the compensation given by the government was for each dead person, the relatives or the next of kin or the families of that person were given 10,000. There were 7 dead in Sunil's family, so he received a total of 70,000. So out of this 70,000, 10,000 went to his sister's husband in Lucknow. The rest of the money was placed in fixed bank deposit. Sunil received 580 per month as interest, and with that he was able to bring up his family. Meanwhile, the Indian government, on behalf of the victims, filed a suit for compensation of more than 3 billion US dollars in the federal court of the Southern District of New York. And in the search for a star witness in New York courts, the government officials settled for Sunil because he was a child who had lost his parents and 5 brothers and sisters in the gas tragedy. So Sunil was a perfect person to be the star witness because he lost his parents as well as his brothers and sisters. So Sunil was selected to represent, to testify himself, to be present what actually happened that very night in the court. And after much persuasion, he was taken to New York. In the court, Sunil told his story fluently in Hindi, and his testimony was translated for the judge. So during the proceedings, the Bhopal District Court ordered Union Carbide to pay an interim relief, that means before the final verdict at New York. In New York, the Bhopal District Court ordered Union Carbide to pay an interim relief sum of 3,500 million. During the proceedings at the Bhopal District Court, Union Carbide was directed to pay an interim relief sum of 3,500 million so that the delay in the passing of judgment of the case would not be adversely affected. However, Union Carbide refused to pay interim relief. They were not ready to pay any relief, and its appeal against this decision reached the Indian Supreme Court. On 14 April 1989, an extraordinary thing happened. So it just so happened that in a sudden departure from the matter of interim relief, the Supreme Court passed an order approving the settlement that had been reached between the government of India and the Union Carbide without the knowledge of the claimants of Bhopal. The Supreme Court passed a judgment that was settled between the government of India and Union Carbide. And the most shocking thing was that this was passed without the knowledge of the claimants. The settlement sum, nearly 1/7 of the damages nearly claimed by the government, while being far below the international standards, was in fact even lower than the modest standards settled by the Indian Railway for railway accidents. So there were widespread protests by the Bhopal victims against the betrayal by the government, and many organizations and individuals, including prominent members of the parliament, supported the call to oppose the infamous settlement. So several petitions were also filed, and the Supreme Court, under immense pressure, announced its revised judgment on 3rd October 1991. So the final judgment upheld the settlement amount paid by Carbide, but directed the Indian government to make any good shortfall during the distribution of compensation. Sunil was finally awarded a compensation of 700,000 rupees. So out of the 700,000 rupees, 100,000 he invested in purchasing a mini bus. The remaining he put in a bank to secure the future of his brother and sister. The minibus brought him 4 to 5,000 rupees a month for 6 months. Then, unfortunately, one day the driver and the conductor were caught smuggling opium in the bus, and the bus was seized by the police. So by now, Sunil had reached manhood. He was a man now. Many people sought to befriend him, all because of the fact that he had money. Many were not genuinely after him, but only because he had money. And he started drinking, and his habit increasingly took hold of him. I am sure he must have been suffering from depression as well, because of the tragedy which had befallen on him and his family in general. So somehow drinking helped him forget about the tragedy for a time being, but it took hold of him. In 1994, his sister turned 18, and his sister was married. So with the passage of time, Sunil became more and more withdrawn, and he was succumbing to pressure and depression. He was frequently depressed and became obsessed with thoughts of suicide. He heard voices call out to him. He would not stir out of his home. He would not wash himself or talk to people. The neighbors took care of his brother and sister and fed Sunil. But unfortunately, his condition worsened. At times, he would just run out of his house without clothes, feverishly roaming the streets night and day, running for kilometers on the railway track into the forest. So 4 years before the writing of this story, Sunil has been on medication for his mental illness. After that, he was moved back to his home in the widow's colony with his brother and sister. He lives and supports his family on the interest earned by the compensation money in the bank. He continues to refuse to touch the principal. He said that he will not touch that money, as the money was for his sister and his brother. After that, his sister got married. Sunil struggled and suffered terribly with his illness, but never lost his sense of humor. He was fully aware that the voices he heard were not real, but could not in the end control them. He made multiple suicide attempts, and even though it is not included in the story, he actually committed suicide. He left a note asserting that he was committing suicide because he was mentally not stable, that this world was too much for him, so he could not carry on. His depression took the better of him, and sadly he committed suicide. Sunil is survived by his, if we look further outside this story, he is survived by his younger brother Sanjay, with whom he was living at the time, by his sister Mamta. Sunil struggled against the greatest of odds and was an incredible example of strength, compassion, and intelligence in the face of unbelievable adversity. That is something which we can learn from the story of Sunil.